welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. This is Jessica. I am a librarian here, which is relevant because of the book, not just because it is a book. You'll hear more about it in a second. This is, as I mentioned, Turn the Page podcast. I'm a little nervous today because this book was so good, and I don't think that I'm going to be able to do it justice, but do my absolute best. I'm here with author Laura Sims, who wrote How Can I Help You?, which actually is very meta for me because it is a book about library workers. And man, it's like, it's a lot packed in a book, and it goes very quickly. And it's about it has two female narrators, Margot. I'm going to say Margot,
Yep.
even though you learn early on that her name is not Margot. And Patricia, it depends on who you ask, right?
She pronounces it Patricia, right?
Patricia.
Margot can't quite get it.
Right. So, and they're both working at this library. They both have their paths that took them there, which are very, very different. But one day, as it happens sometimes, a dead body is found in the library bathroom, and it kind of sets off a chain of sort of events that kind of throw a lot of things together. So, man, this book is crazy. Please tell me where it came from. And welcome, Laura Sims.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It came from a couple of things, or a few things. First was Margot, and she is inspired by a real person named Jane Toppin, who was a serial killing nurse in the 1800s. And I learned about her listening to a true crime podcast called Criminal, which is, I think, one of the best true crime podcasts out there. And they did an episode on Jane. They called her Jolly Jane because she was very cheerful, energetic, efficient nurse, but she was also killing her patients by injecting them with morphine and climbing on top of them as they died to watch them. I mean, she was a real piece of work. So she fascinated me when I heard that podcast. And so I just kind of tucked her in the back of my brain for later, like, oh, this is a possible character someday. I always wanted to write a female psychopath serial killer. That's one of my dreams. So she seemed to fit the bill. And then the other piece was working at the library. And I worked part-time at my local library. I had been very part-time, like once a month, until the pandemic hit. And then there were a lot of people who didn't want to come back, understandably, to work. And so I started working a little more often and really got to know what a wonderful, rich setting it would be for a novel. And I started taking notes like Patricia does in the book, because she's a writer also, about my different encounters with people. And at some point, and I don't remember when, but those two ideas merged. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want her to be on the run, living this camouflaged life in the library. Those were the two main parts that came together for inspiration.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I agree with you. I've worked at this library since 2002.
Okay, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a while. And I started when I was in my very early 20s. I was like right out of college, and I just gone back to library school, and I happened to get a part-time trainee position here. And, I had a lot of people who were like, oh, you're working at a library, you're going to library school. What do they teach you? Intro to shushing? And you just learn that that's a really kind of tire joke very, very
Oh,
quickly because
yes.
you learn a lot about people at the library and you learn a lot about interpersonal relationships and just sort of how things work and how people relate to each other. But also some really crazy things happen because it is a public building. And obviously, I'm not
Yeah.
going to go into anything, here, this is the library's podcast. I'll say, you see things sometimes and you're just like, what? And librarians, and I love you, I am one of them, I am one of you. We're some quirky folks. So not only do we attract quirky people here, but we attract quirky workers. And I really just immediately, when I started reading this book, I was just grabbed by Margot. And obviously it's not spoiling it saying that Margot has some issues because she's based on
She does. She
this
does.
killer nurse.
Yeah.
But I really liked her.
I'm so glad to hear that because I really like her too.
I mean, I really like her. And, Patricia as well. And, like they both feel like people who I've known and just kind of putting them together in this setting, with a reference desk, by the way, which is very funny to me. There's like a whole thing about like reference questions and getting reference questions and who takes what question. And I thought that that was really funny too. It was
Yeah.
just such a good place to sort of grow this story. So I mean, why specifically the reference desk?
I guess because I work at the reference desk. And I get a lot of interesting questions and calls there, maybe more than the circulation desk does because they get the calls and they send them to me. so, so that's why, I mean, very practical, but the reference desk seems it is the perfect place for this character to be, I think. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And like so, and also I have to say, like some of the people, especially that Margot was dealing with in the beginning, who are using the computers.
Yeah, I know
I
what you're referring to.
I just again, and it's like it's something I would never talk about here because again, it's
Right.
public and like certain incidents they happened a long time ago. But I was like, man, is every computer room of like a library? Do we all have people who just come with this similar quirk? Because it's very funny. Like you would be surprised, and it's just a really like it's a really good place for, like I said, like for to grow this story. And like I thought that so you have Margot's story, but then Patricia's story is she really wants to write a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she has something completely different that she left behind. So, like, when you were really like putting her story together, um, I know you mentioned, it's like you noticed that this was a good place to sort of like take notes about people. Did she sort of come from anywhere else, or was she kind of just sitting very meta in your mind?
She's definitely meta. There's definitely a lot of me in Patricia. I think, I had Margot's voice and I had the library setting and I started writing it with just Margot. And I think I realized at a certain point, like, I need something more. I need a foil for her, and I need something to enrich the book and the narration. And that is where Patricia came from. And she was easy for me, right? And she's a writer, she's a librarian. So yes, there's a lot of me in her, but she started off that way. And then of course she has her own interesting progression where she has things happen and does things. But yeah, so it was interesting. Putting these two women together was what made it so interesting. And like you, I really liked Margot. I loved writing her. But as the book goes along, I actually preferred writing Patricia. she became more interesting to me as the book progressed.
One thing about Patricia, and I just had to write this down sort of because it was a thought that came up. She really is like a researcher at heart.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of something that, that's another thing that attracts people to a library as a worker or as a patron as well. This sort of need to dig deeper and this sort of need to sometimes you uncover something and then you just want to find out as much as possible. I know I've mentioned a few times, like sometimes I'll do something myself that I call like parallel reading, where I'll read a book that's about a topic, and then I'll find a nonfiction book about the same topic, and I'll read them simultaneously because it's okay, I'm already here, but I want to feel the setting out more. And I think that I really dug Patricia. Now I'm becoming Margot here. Patricia.
You can call her whatever you want.
I'm not going to do that. I really loved Patricia's, just her thought process because it was so relatable. It did sort of capture that feeling of that you're following this fire trail and you're just like, oh, is this going to explode on me? But you just can't help yourself.
Can't stop. I know. She's
Yeah.
definitely carried away. And she has these underutilized research skills that she's found she isn't really using at work, And that was a surprise to me from libraries. The transition from library school to real world library was that, oh, I'm not helping people with research projects very often. It's more like these phone calls. What time is this show on? What's the weather in Dubai? And other stranger things. So it's fun that she gets to use her research skills which help her writing.
I think what's really funny about this also is, you mentioned that stuff. I remember like way back when there was some commercial. It was a commercial about like somebody not knowing the lyrics to a song. It was the pour some sugar on me, and they call the library to find out about like, hey, can you tell me? And you're just like, you think like, oh, in the day and age of computers and smartphones, like that doesn't happen anymore, does it?
It does, because not
Yep.
everybody has computers and smartphones, That's, who comes to the library now, or people left behind by the digital revolution. Yeah, I think people don't realize that. Just assume, oh, everybody has computers. Well, no, they don't.
That was, I think, something that I really liked about this book. And I also like, because a lot of times when a book is sort of has less technology like that, it's the writer putting it in an earlier time frame.
Right.
But this one wasn't, and I appreciated that about it. It's a good look at just sort of how things work in other places. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have a lot of people have such outdated, romanticized ideas about the library, and they're still popping up in new films and books and that show the library as this kind of sacred, quiet book vault. And it's just not the case anymore. It's a community center. We help people who are left behind by so many other institutions. It's like one of the last places that welcomes everyone.
And that was, that was also sort of to the chagrin of certain characters in this book.
That's true.
Like it works out. It works out if you don't have a shady history, but if you do,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But one thing also, how would you like characterize the genre of this book? Because I am definitely a suspense horror reader, but I know that if you call something horror, automatically people are like, oh, well, they'll think slasher, they'll think automatically bloody. And I always feel like I have to explain to people, like, I mean, sometimes, but like, what do you call the true crime that you consume?
Right.
Do you call that horror? Because
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, and this was like, I mean, really, it was like very suspenseful. It had my heart pounding, and it also does deal with, a serial killer, like a
Yeah.
serial killing nurse, and it
Yeah.
deals with just some real like psychological stuff that is it's akin to that, but also it's also suspense. It's like
Yeah.
it's something I would recommend, but depending on who I recommend it to, like my horror friends, I'd be like, you know what, you're gonna like this one. This is like
Right.
real,
That's
this is like real, like a cat and mouse type story, and
yeah.
it's got a little bit of everything in it. But then, to people who are like, oh, I just like thrillers, I'd be like, yep, this book is for you too.
That's good. That's good. Yes. I love it. I love it when people call this book and Looker, my first book, horror. I think that it comes closest to psychological horror. I think that is the closest genre, but it's rarely called that. And it's usually called a thriller. I think the publisher's marketing it as literary fiction slash suspense thriller. So any of those are fine, but I really love it being called like psychological horror. I think that's the most accurate.
I agree. And I think that, I mean, for me, that's like the horror that I usually like the best too.
Yes.
Like that's what's, like when I have a bit of an affinity for, every like a classic slasher film. I feel like at this point
Yeah.
it's been overdone.
Yeah.
Like I feel like for me, I feel like after like the original Scream trilogy, I'm like, okay, because that was technically a parody on them. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, yeah, okay, so I'm good with that. But psychological stuff is really like, that's really scary because it feels very real, and it
Yeah.
deals with like, who can you trust? And what I like about the location of this is that you are supposed to trust the library, and people do have these visions of library. Well, when you go into a library, every people who don't know, like, they'll just be like, oh, well, everybody's a librarian who works there. And then if you
Yeah.
ask librarians, like one of Margot's coworkers, like, well, she's technically not a librarian, like
Right.
people
Right.
get very nitpicky about it, but everybody's just like, oh, she works in a library, she's a good quiet person who's never done a thing. And
Right. It
yeah.
upends your expectations.
Yes.
And same for the library. It was fun to set it in this place, like you said, that people trust, that is cozy and welcoming. So very fun to set a very dark story in the library for that reason.
So am I to understand your first book is under some sort of adaptation? I guess actually now, because we have the
Yeah.
writer's strike. Yeah, it's so funny because we've had this conversation come up on the podcast a few times, and then it's like we have to remind ourselves, and then it just keeps getting,
I know.
yeah.
Yes. Yes, it's been optioned since 2018. Emily Mortimer optioned it, and she would star in it, produce and direct. And so she's had it for many years and has been a passionate champion. And we came close. It was at HBO for a while, and then HBO dropped it. And so now, as soon as the strike ends, hopefully soon, we'll see, they are going to shop it around again. But they have kind of they have Emily, Jessica Biel is the co-star. She'll play the actress in Looker. They have 2 scripts were written. They're fabulous scripts by 2 women writers, screenwriters. So they have this great package. So I really hope that it happens. It's such a long, if you think that the publishing industry is complex, then it's like Hollywood is just 1,000 times more complicated and things take forever.
I definitely hear that because we do. It's funny, and then when you talk to authors who are kind of going through this, and then you're just like listening to how long it takes. But then sometimes, something comes out and it spreads
Yeah.
like wildfire, and people who read the book are like, yeah, I read that a long time ago. And you think like, if they just jumped on this a little sooner. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I would love to see how can I help you in some sort of
Me too. Yeah,
something.
me too.
Um,
The
I would
strike
like
also, yeah, putting a squash on that right now, but hopefully we'll see.
I would like to ask before we close out,
Yeah.
who are some of your favorite fictional librarians?
Oh gosh, I just wrote an essay on this for Electric Lit, so I should know.
No
It's come.
way.
Yes, I
I
wrote.
swear I didn't know that.
So one of my favorites is Jennifer Sang's Mayumi and the Sea of Happiness. Do you know that book? It's a wonderful book. It came out in 2016, I think, and it is about a librarian living on a small island off the shore of Washington State. And she's kind of bored with her life, and she enters into a really ill-advised romantic relationship with a patron. And it's such a great book, such a great book. And I'm going to blank on any others. Of course, I'm dying to read Patrick DeWitt's new novel, The Librarianist, which has a librarian protagonist. And I'm blanking on my other choices that I just wrote about. Do you have favorites?
Oh, absolutely, 110%. So, I mean, film, TV wise, and I guess comic wise, and I guess book wise at this point, because he's made an appearance in all of them. I am 110% a fan of Rupert Giles from Buffy. He
Oh,
is so
right.
great. Yeah,
I
like,
wasn't even thinking about TV. I was just thinking books.
oh
Yeah.
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 Yeah, Rupert Giles is my favorite. I absolutely just sort of love him.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of layers to him. It didn't hurt that is it Anthony Stewart Head or Stewart Anthony Head? Now I can't remember. That he is nice to look at. Although
Easy on the eyes.
the character he plays on Ted Lasso is a horrible person, and that might have
Oh,
cured
right.
me. Yeah, that might have cured me a little bit of it. But
Oh,
yeah, he's by far one of them. There's also the librarian in the Discworld series who is he an orangutan? Now I can't remember. But like I generally like these characters that somehow skew the the view of librarians
yes,
because
absolutely.
oh, and you know who else, and I guess she's literature and TV and comics as well. I'm
Yeah.
just going for all the weird ones. Have you This is so technically this is children's, but have you ever read, watched, or I guess read the graphic novels of Hilda?
Oh, yes. Yes.
That librarian,
Right. He's
she
a
has a
librarian.
yes, she has a name in the TV series, and I'm blanking on it now, but she's great.
Yeah.
She's a favorite of mine. I like her a lot. I like that all the librarians in that series are witches,
Uh-huh.
in one
That's
way or
awesome.
another, and some of them are like really set in their ways, like like you need to return the book at a certain time, and then there are some that are a little bit less.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, she's one of my favorites too.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And Matilda, I'm just remembering, of course, the librarian, and that is wonderful
Yep.
in Roald Dahl's book. And yeah, I can't believe I'm, completely blanking on these. I picked 7 books with featuring librarians. So check that out because
When
my
it's when is it
memory
going to be
is,
published?
it'll come out, I think, on Tuesday. I think tomorrow.
Oh,
Definitely
okay.
sometime this week. But I
All right.
might be tomorrow. Yes.
All
See, I
right.
wrote it so long ago that it has left my brain, but at least I remembered a couple titles.
So this is so I guess today it's July 17th, so it'll be out by the time this goes up.
Yep.
Laura, thank you so much. Are you working on another book at the moment?
Yes, I was very happy to finish a very bad draft of the complete draft of a new novel before all of this started. So yes, I have that to go back to. I love revising, so I'm happy to be done with drafting. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, this was wonderful. Check out How Can I Help You? This book is so, so good. It is, I had a good friend over this weekend and I just kept telling her how good it was.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm telling everybody who's listening how good it is. Read it.
Good.
It is amazing. You have blurbs from like Paul Tremblay, who wrote The Cabin at the End of the World, and like Samantha Downing, who writes these really wild books too that I love.
Yeah.
I mean, really, this is going to be one I think that's going to be on everyone's radar,
I hope so.
and it's going to cross over genres. I think so.
I hope so. That's wonderful.
So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. Our guest today was
Laura Sims.
And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.